damn shit, and they put the white boy down as the decoy, and you focusing on him. He's a minor player. He's a pawn in the goddamn game, just like we are pawn to white folks, and other white folks are pawns to white folks. Well, they are pawns to other entities that we'll go deeper into the next 2 days and stuff, because they need to be unmasked. They need to be unmasked.
And this is the trick of the ego. So the ego basically says, oh yeah, I know about FBI, CIA, whatever terms you want to give. And then maybe you have a couple things that you've seen, and then now you got it locked in. Like, okay, I know what it means. When you've never studied it, you never even sat down for a moment and just tried to digest it and say, hey, is this really true? So that it can cross the almost like a conscious blood-brain barrier that we also have, meaning that, do I accept it as factual and begin to change my life and how I move because I know it's true? Or do I keep it in the good movie, good documentary category where, I still need to investigate further, but I don't actually believe all of that is real or it doesn't matter? Okay, so those are two totally different categories. One results in action and the other one is more of like entertainment, right? So I was ingesting this from a real level and being the fly on the wall to different things that were going on from both sides. And then starting to see that, man, this is on that level specifically, way deeper than people could ever even believe. And even if they read just this one book, they would know exactly what's going on right now and even how it's going to end up and what is the ultimate goal. But because they don't read or know about any of this, or they're not multidisciplinary enough, then they don't get it. So listen to what this says. I like this. I came across this soundbite again today.
Important to draw wisdom from many different places. If we take it from only one place, it becomes rigid and stale. Understanding others, the other elements, and the other nations will help you become whole.
All right. So that was in the bank a while ago, but it popped up again today. And I was like, yo, something's always going on around here, because once I had digested this whole, let's say the Mossad thing, and there was another book to follow up. It's like Mossad of the Amazons or whatever. And I'm have that in the queue to check out at some point. I kind of went on to my own thing again. Like I got stuff to do, right? And then all of a sudden, this shows up in my feed.
All right, moving on. A senior Iranian official has made a stunning allegation. He claims that Israel employed occult powers and supernatural forces during the recent 12-day conflict between the two countries. Abdullah Ganji, who is the former editor of the IRGC-linked newspaper, made the claim in a post on X. He said that after the war, a few sheets of paper were found on the streets of Tehran containing talismans with Jewish symbols, calling it a strange phenomenon. He also cited previous unverified reports that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had met with occult specialists during the early stages of the Gaza war. Ganji went on to claim that the use of supernatural methods by foreign intelligence services had long been warned about by Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei earlier. He said that hostile countries and Western and Hebrew intelligence services use these supernatural powers and jinn entities for espionage. His post did not go unnoticed and in fact triggered a reaction from Israel's political advisor to the permanent representative at the United Nations. Walid Ghadban responded sarcastically by reposting a Mossad message with the caption, "Jinn are everywhere," followed by a ghost emoji.
Well, here's the trickster element and this phenomenon. It does lie to you, and it is very, very deceitful at times. It will tell you things that sound wonderful, but but also they make no sense. And is it toying with us, or is it using some kind of symbols that we don't understand? I don't know. I don't think so. I think in a way, I refer to them as the jinn, because the jinn, in Arab culture, they're sort of like us, only they're made out of quote unquote fire or ether or what have you. But they also have the same kind of, not emotions. Well, I guess you could say they have emotions too. But there's good jinn and there's bad jinn, and they play games and what have you. And in a sense, maybe this phenomenon is playing games with us. If you read a good folklorist or a cultural anthropologist who studied fairy lore, and Jacques Vallée pointed this out in numerous books. It's pretty much identical what the experiences were of the people experiencing these type of things with fairies, leprechauns, elves, sylphs, and those things. To what we're seeing today. The only thing that's different is the context. They're seeing, the time element, the child elements involved. It's just a different context. We're seeing UFOs as opposed to, little funny leprechauns and little ships.
Often the Most High reveals fragments of truth ahead of their appointed time. We see them, but we don't yet understand their meaning until later, when the pieces finally connect. Years ago, I was drawn to a video game titled Beyond Two Souls. Developed by Quantic Dream and released in 2013, Beyond Two Souls follows the life of Jody Holmes, a young girl with a psychic tether to a supernatural entity named Aiden, an invisible presence with immense power. Unseen by others, Aiden is with her at all times, influencing her surroundings, protecting her and at times threatening those around her. As the story unfolds, Jody is taken in and studied by a government agency. That agency is the CIA. They monitor her, measure her, train her. They weaponize her abilities, deploying her on covert missions. But what begins as scientific curiosity soon unravels into something far more sinister. A direct engagement with what the game calls the infraworld, a shadowy, alternate realm filled with parasitic hostile spirits. What's compelling is that this isn't just paranormal fiction. It's a reflection of known intelligence operations, MK Ultra, Project Stargate, CIA programs in remote viewing, psychic soldiers, spiritual possession, and the use of jinn, all of which mirror real declassified research. The game ultimately becomes a case study in spiritual manipulation, trauma-based conditioning, and the weaponization of souls. And the idea that an entity could attach itself to you and the state would not only permit it, but partner with it, is more than symbolic. It is instructional.
We live in a world that is a challenge. The faithless believe there is only one world but many gods, and they worship those gods. Are these gods jinn?
Yeah, that's it. That's what Quran says, is that you took these jinns as your Lord and Saviors. Because of the superior might and power, who brought these megalith structures?
Mm-hmm.
You think some slaves did that with a stick and a rock? But these were the jinn entities that would show their power and their superiority, and as a result they were bowed down to. And what they wanted was the worshipping of people. And they said, oh, they're aliens from many thousands of years. They live for thousands of years. Their life is 4,000 years. So these manifestations and all these things that we're seeing, that's from their reality.
So now we have the new opening of the next part of the message, which involves a character by the name of John Dee and another character by the name of Edward Kelly, also known as Edward Tolbert. And this came because as the beginning of the whole energy coming through with the spy thing was happening, it was prepping me for understanding that there were spiritual spies, if you may. And not only that the construct that we live in right now, well, not us, many of the consciousnesses that subscribe to things like eschatology, which means basically an end, or even a rapture, that all these ideas were formulated during a specific time and then propagated through the world as if this was truth. And it eventually made its way into new scriptures and new books. And it has now made its way to being the most popular Christian tradition in the world, and rapidly trending as Christian Zionism. Okay? So first of all, let's get a little background here on who exactly we're talking about. And we'll begin with John Dee. And John Dee, and let me pull up some slides here, is known as the Boy Wonder. We're talking about the time of 1546 AD. He's having lectures on Euclid in Paris at 19, according to his backdrop. He's produced navigation tables. This is the gentleman on the left. He's produced navigation tables for the Northwest Passage schemes. He's advised earls of Northumberland and Leicester, Courtiers such as Robert Dudley became long-term patrons and later vouched for him at Elizabeth's accession. This is Queen Elizabeth. He was arrested for casting horoscopes on Queen Mary and Princess Elizabeth. Which is technically treason. He was cleared after the Star Chamber hearings, which concluded that he had drew an electoral chart that fixed January the 15th of 1559 as Elizabeth's coronation day, which it turned out being, meaning he predicted that Queen Elizabeth would ascend to the throne before she did and exactly what day she would do so. And in this way, it says here, selecting the date that she gave him as her personal audience, and she won the Queen's trust, and she began calling him my philosopher. We also have Robert Talbot Kelly, who's pictured here on the right. Kelly, then 26, under the alias Talbot, walked uninvited into Dee's study one day at Mortlake, offering his services as a scryer and a crystal gazer. There are some accounts here that say that there was an ad that Dee put out looking for a scryer or crystal gazer, but this says that he just walked in one day because Dee was advertising for a good seer or a spiritual apparitionist. Kelly allegedly produced the archangel Uriel in a crystal sphere, convincing Dee to hire him at $50 per annum, or an unusually high stipend for a non-gentleman. Okay, so this is Kelly's background. There's a little bit more information. He was married to a widow who was wealthy, etc. But this is how the two got together according to the accounts. We have one other person that we need to introduce in this trio, which would be Francis Walsingham, who is a European spy, 1570 to 1590. He was tasked with spotting the Catholic coalitions that might back an invasion of England. Because, see, contrary to even some of the thought today, which is actually a program thought that many of the Christian churches are, they all united because they all believe in Christ. This is like saying that all the Arabs are united because they all believe in Allah. And what you find is nothing could be further from the truth. This should teach us once again that the religious domicile is completely corrupted, infiltrated, and its use is really to just modify and continue to bring forth the objectives of the king, now especially. But back in the day, there was this thing where the Catholics had all but monopolized the whole Christian theos. And it was big. I mean, in these areas especially, you were a Catholic. Catholic meant even that you were wealthy. And so in that way, things like buying indulgences, which is the Pope saying, hey, if you committed this sin, you can just buy some of these indulgences, maybe keep a little bit in stock, and you can keep sinning. That there rose a group, sometimes known as the Protestants, that said, you know what, this ain't right. It's just really should be about the Bible, not about, all of this. And, of course, they were pointing out all the things that were going on illegitimately with then Catholicism, especially in relation to Christ. This birthed an entirely new part of the tradition. Again, those later on become known as the Protestants. But primarily, what the Queen and the spies were interested in knowing, amongst many things, was, one, are these Catholics getting to a level where they can, join in with others who are attempting to attack us? So it wasn't like a religious thing for them to begin to spy on Catholics and to even begin to think about creating another religion altogether. Because what you continue to find in this context is the royals become extremely, from the beginning, addicted to alternative spiritual systems. It's almost as if they already know that Christianity is a sham, and they're either taking the philosophical route, like to see, hey, what do some of the old philosophers say? Or they're really interested in sorcerers, necromancers, or people rolling throughout the land that have some kind of ability. But that was all really kind of surmised in things like tarot, predictions, projections, oracular work. So this was extremely popular amongst the royals. So right away, Francis Walsingham, who was the lead spy, realized that spirituality, if you made alternative spirituality, was a perfect segue into spycraft. Because, I call this the why, statecraft via spectacle. That's the term. In Prague, the promise of gold plus angelic revelations, because remember this whole thing about turning dirt into gold from the alchemists, right? Like a prince is thinking, yo, if I could turn dirt into gold, I'm going to be like the biggest king of the world. This is really what it was like. It was easy to get them to be like, hey, come over, perform some of these tricks. So it goes on, it says the promise of gold plus angelic revelations. This is like, hey, the angels say you're going to win this battle. You know what I mean? So this kind of thing, they were hooked. So it says angelic revelations perfectly match Rudolph II's quest for universal knowledge, right? Because they were trying to infiltrate Rudolph II. And they knew, you could get him with that idea that gold, that you could produce gold infinitely and that you can use angels to cast horoscopes. So it says Kelly staged transmutations, drew nobles into private laboratories where he and Dee, put them back up on the screen again, could gather political intelligence useful to the Elizabethan spy master Francis Walsingham, who we just saw, who already received coded letters from Dee signed 007. We talked about John Dee was the original 007. So it goes on. Theatrical transmutations brought nobles close and it loosened their tongues. Spies love a salon magnet. Royals love the occult. Forward intelligence on Poland, Bohemia, and the Empire. At that very moment, Philip II was trying to bind them into an anti-English Catholic league. And that information was leaked from Kelly and Dee to the Queen through these letters signed 007 that were in a cipher. Technological booty. Dee shipped home new Continental Star catalogs, metallurgy recipes, and a copy of Rudolph's mining codes. Invaluable to Queen Elizabeth's advisors who were planning English tin and copper monopolies. Okay? So this literally alters the future the work that these guys are doing from the spy level alone. But watch how, because the projection is so grand, it also begins to alter the future of the spiritual aspects of things, even up until this very day, to even what becomes Rosicrucian later on, Rosicrucianism, etc. Watch. It goes on as soft power coup. Long before England had resident ambassadors in Prague, a pair of wandering philosophers were dining with emperors and reporting back nightly. Edward Kelly, traveling as Dee's spiritual medium, provided perfect cover. Angelic seances and alchemical demonstrations drew in exactly the aristocrats Walsingham wanted to watch. Okay? So now you're watching what it means to be like a double agent. Because after careful digging, I wasn't able to throw out that Kelly and Dee didn't somehow have spiritual affiliations also, which of course, and reading this, you could just say, oh, okay, they were all just using the spiritual stuff just to like get their foot in, and it was all a sham. That ultimately doesn't prove to be completely true, maybe in the beginning. But even at that stage, maybe even some invisible entities were like, yo, this is a perfect way to infiltrate the rest of them. You see what I mean? Spy versus spy on layers, where a person is thinking that, oh, you getting over, it's just the vibe, right? Where they scheming and doing all types of stuff and attract scheming energies who are way more advanced at this kind of thing. So here's what happens. Let's go to the text here. John Dee's Enochian blueprint. John Dee, advisor to Queen Elizabeth I, used Enochian magic and occult communications with angelic intelligences to craft a Kabbalistic blueprint for the global Protestant hegemony. So this means this is the beginning of the Protestants. Remember, Manifest Destiny and even the Quakers and Seventh-day Adventists, all of them later on are sprouting from this root. But this was the beginning. And it says a framework entirely foreign to the early New Testament teachings, right? So they came in with basically Kabbalistic magic. We're going to see some of this here in a minute. It goes on that crystal scrying to contact angelic intelligences, which is something that we're going to specifically look into, because it turns out that when I start tracing this knowledge that they were using, they weren't the inventors of it, which is even the concept today. Like, oh yeah, Dee and Kelly brought in a brand new system and that taught Crowley. That wasn't the case. And many of their techniques were definitely taken directly from the Mesoamericans, especially the stuff that works, i.e. your Mayans, your Aztecs, etc., your Olmecs, etc. So watch this. So it says Dee and his medium, Edward Kelly, spent years in his library immersed in Kabbalistic mysteries, but it was Dee's practice of gazing into polished crystals that set it all in motion. So this means that what he found out from the Mesoamericans, which they had infiltrated all those areas, think of Christopher Columbus, etc., that they found out something could be used to contact the other world. Let's keep going. Through these experiments, he believed he was talking and speaking directly with angels, and that evil spirits, which he believed to be angels. And Kelly faithfully recorded their recordings in what they termed a pre-Hebraic or Enochian language. Okay, let's look at some imagery here. Let me take myself off the screen. This is the actual mirror. I think all of this still sits in the Louvre. John Dee's actual scrying obsidian mirror, which I even found the mine that it was pulled from. And the mine was completely, they were saying like they have recordings of this mine. Like I'll provide the information if anybody wants it later on, just ask me, I'll pull it up. But they say that this mine had been so exploited, but it was a mine filled with black obsidian glass in Mexico. or somewhere around Mexico. I'll have to get the exact stuff. I don't want to be off here. But what I'm saying is they still had the mirror. And then notice on the back of the mirror, the V's here. So this is still the magical tools that Dee used and Kelly used that are still being preserved in the Louvre, I believe. So that's also called the Black Tezcatlipoca, which is basically the obsidian mirror. They call it, there's many things. So I'm going to actually get to a point of, because I just stopped for a minute because I realized that I was getting, when I was reading, I was getting spy stuff, truths, lies. So I realized that my discernment needed to go up quite a few notches. And I didn't want to rule out that some of the things that they were doing was all fanciful. I was being advised by myself not to do that. Like, yo, don't think that everything these dudes are doing is just all, you know, smoke and mirror, spycraft stuff. There's a real connection here with spirits because it becomes way more pronounced later on. But in these times, it seemed like it was all surmised that they end up just being spies and the spiritual stuff gets thrown out the window. However, after looking carefully through everything, it clearly appears that they had been summoning entities and that the entities took it from there at a certain point. And they always had that cover. In this case, the cover was that they were spies, right? So nobody really took after that what they were doing really serious, except for Aleister Crowley, Madame Blavatsky, and all of the secret societies that became Freemasonry and Illuminati and everybody else, which becomes quite interesting that this is the origins of those crafts. So it goes on. Reception of the Enochian keys and the language keys of the tables, okay, which I'm going to break all this down here in a moment because I kind of created like this master prompt that basically says in so many words, if we believe that what we're hearing is true and what we're being instructed on is based on what we're being instructed on by these higher level of intelligences, based on that, what is really possible? So instead of analyzing it from a state like, is this really true? Let's go over that state and imagine that it's already true. What are we talking about? So I hit it with a prompt like that. And what I came back with was really, really interesting, which we'll talk about here in a minute. So let's keep reading. The reception of the Enochian systems and language keys and tables. Over 100 sessions, the angelic interlocutors. Wow, they coming with the big words today. The angelic interlocutors dedicated a wholly new mystical framework, a specialized Enochian alphabet and vocabulary, sequences of calls or keys to unlock successive aethers or cosmic regions, detailed tables mapping angels, planets, and Kabbalistic correspondences. This vast corpus became Dee's operational manual for invoking and directing spiritual forces, central to his vision of a great work to reshape history. Okay? So in Dee's mind, he's performing a great work to reshape history. In Queen Elizabeth and Welsingham's mind, they're utilizing Dee to get information from all of these royals and higher ups in other countries that he's traveling through that are interested in this occultism. Meanwhile, when he's sending messages back, he's using the sigillum, which of course then is based on not only the Enochian language, which you see here, not only the device that you see in the bottom right, the top right corner, and pushing for ciphers like this. And when these are going through, if they get stopped or caught or anything, these are all magical treaties for Dee's magical angelic system. But really, many of these, they say about 36 of them, encrypted messages directly to the queen. And they would pass through and nobody would know, what is this? What are we talking about? And then if anybody questioned, it's like, oh, that's the angelic system of the Enochian, blah, 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 blah. And in the end, these were messages directly to the queen. But in some tenses, these were also the occult practices and treaties from the system. So in many ways, it was hard to tell, like, is this accurate knowledge? Are these real angels' names? Or are these encoded messages, which is why the angels sound so strange? Because that was the main thing that I noticed right off when going through the lexicon of the names of the entities that he was supposedly evoking, is that some of the names looked like none of the entities names that I've ever seen. And that's what started making me speculate that many of these entities' names were not, in fact, names of entities, but were something else. And then I wanted to know what that something was. But my logical route was to first see if any of these weird names had been mentioned elsewhere. And it turned out that they had. And that's when I was, in that way, kind of on to the whole thing. So let me just kind of show real quick the verification of that. Oh, there it is. Okay, so stuff is in kind of an order. It's just a shifting system that's weird. So it turned out that there was a book written. Now notice, okay, let me change the time on this too. The duration is set. Weird time. Okay. So notice that, there's still way more to dissect with this, because even when it said Honorius of Thebes, I was already like, oh man, as much as we've talked about Thebes and the Cobra and the cult of Amun and all of that, like that just was a dead ringer. But this book predated what Dee was talking about by 200 to 300 years. So even though later on, and even to this day, for many of the adherents of the system, they believe that the system was wholly created by John Dee. And this was also because he did change certain things inside the sigillum. That could have been because that sigillum that was changed was actually the one used as the cross cipher for the queen to read the messages that he was sending her, not necessarily that he was creating a new system. But that's what it ended up becoming, because everybody went with that, because there were only 3 copies of this book in the world at that time. And Dee had 2 of them, according to the text. And I will quote from the book here, because now the book is known, the Oath, which ironically appears with those same symbols, which these symbols mean, and this is why there has to be a point where we kind of, like, as spiritualists, take a step back, decode things, maybe even get like something professional going on around it, meaning a real budget, and rework like what we think we know about spiritual history. Give me one quick second. I'm gonna open up this screen share. Here it is. This is pulling from the Book of Honorius, just what it's stating here in the Oath. And what I'm also bringing forth is, you see this cross here that you see often in many places. You see it as the Hitler's hammer. You see it in the Queen of England. This symbol in itself was basically a recognition, and we went through this many times, but that this is a vehicle to cross between one plane and another. It literally is like 2 hourglasses. It breaks into geometry. It's also called the Maltese star. So they go deep with this, but it's heavily used in the occult. And as you see, even in this text, it goes forward, and this is why there was only 3 books, is that there was an oath that then the princes and the prelates, secular and church authorities, contended with the burning of the fables and the destruction of the schools. They believed this art to be utterly destroyed. We, being moved by their madness and rage, have made these oaths. First, that nobody should be given this book unless the master is at the point of death. That he should provide himself no more than 3. And that it will be given to no woman, nor to a man unless he is mature, most faithful and upright. They love to put that in there. 22. Both of which should be assessed by observing his mannerisms throughout an entire year, and that otherwise it should not be destroyed, but returned to him or to his successor. And that if no one sufficient is found to whom the book might be given, that the master must bind his executors and with the strongest oaths to bury it in his tomb or he himself, while living, should bury it in some clean and honorable place and not reveal the place under any circumstance. Okay, so this was the beginning of the Book of Honoris, which later on was used as the corpus that John Dee developed his magical systems from. But for a long time, and even to this very day, it was perceived that he created the system. And this perception came in because the sigillum that is being shown in the book, while having the same geometry and everything in the insides, many of the names and things were changed. Some thought that Dee had perfected the work by finding the rest of the angels from the watchtower. Others believed that the perfected one was simply a cipher for him to use to send private messages to the queen. Okay, just so you understand the narrative. By the way, hell of a story. I'm surprised Netflix ain't picked up on this. You know what I mean? It's like, what? So going on, so I'm, of course, extracting truth from falsehood. I'm trying to see, hey, what's useful here? Honestly, what becomes the most useful is to see how things panned out. But there's also other useful things that they emit through their magical practices that leads us to understanding how the spiritual reality also works, mainly in relation to crystal, because I took even a moment to just dig in this further from the crystal gazing, scrying thing. Because it was like, I have my own relationship with crystals. And again, I was like, okay, maybe this sounds like a good corpus to draw from all the sources. What are they saying on why these crystals can do this kind of stuff? Let's just answer that question first. And here's what I came up with. I just have a little note here. The crystal and the knowledge that appears to be Mesoamerican. I just say that in a broader context because you don't really understand what tribe specifically had this corpus. Again, Sergio Magaña's work also talks about this in the work with the obsidian mirror, again, the smoky mirror, the black Tezcatlipoca, etc. But here's what they say about it. Listen to this. Metaphysical optics, okay? The stones are said to be interfaces between the elemental world and the 30 aethers, okay? So if we want to put this into just direct context, and this is why I knew this reeks of being Mesoamerican, because they're mentioning that there's horizontal and vertical waters, and then there's a point of intersection. And at these points of intersections, what you call a crystal, which is like basically the crystallization of the two opposing forces meeting, like the same way a diamond is formed in that way. It's like the two opposing forces, pressure, heat, steam, all these different opposing forces are coalescing and they're creating what we call a crystal. The crystal is the birth. So it's like, remember how we saw the chart and the crystals are like way, way further back than everything else? Because they're like the origin point or the coalescing of the where there's two worlds, if you may, which are also seen as opposite. Is not the spiritual and the physical world like opposites? We've talked about how the spirit body and the physical body is the marriage, but in many ways they're like opposites. So they're trying to get you a little bit further along in realizing what's going on. They're saying that, well, opposites exist even within the cosmos, if you may, but where they intersect, those points become crystals. And if you happen to have one of those crystals, and we'll go on here, that they become basically these interfaces to be able to see or communicate. Let's keep going. So it says an angel in April 1583, and again, this is all pulled from Dee's diaries, explains that every pure stone is a window opened in the dark house of thy sight. I'll just paste that there for those who want to just meditate on that, because it clearly they drop in the knowledge and it needs to be baked on. I'll put that in here. And again, this appears to be coming from a Mesoamerican source. So they're saying, again, that these are interfaces and every pure stone is a window opened in the dark house of your sight, meaning the things that you cannot see can be seen with crystals. Now, microscope is filled with crystals. There's a lot of different things. The computer, we're seeing in all types of stuff filled with crystals. So this shows to be logical that you can see things with crystals that you cannot see, that you're blind to with your own sight. Okay. It also calls for the black speculum. Okay. This is called the devil's looking glass. Dee calls it lapis niger and says it draweth the angels as iron doeth the lodestone. And what he's referring to, that this obsidian mirror drew angels or entities to it, like a magnet would be for a lodestone. So just like when you rolling around with a magnet and then you got metal and it just track right to it, that the black glass obsidian Tezcatlipoca was like that for spirits, that they would just dive into it, if you may. Kelly is told that the quartz echoes the watery humor of a man's own seeing, making it a sympathetic conduit for the vision, meaning that obviously there were two devices that were used. There was the obsidian mirror, and then there was the crystal ball. And Kelly said that the ball itself that he had, which you can see in the picture, that it almost in itself functioned like an eye. It did the same thing that the eye does with how it's able to have, like, on the edges, what we call now a bokeh. And through this, you could see through your own eye other things. Okay. So it goes on that this is sometimes called Ganzfeld plus hypnagogia, a featureless, reflective, or translucid field deprives the vision cortex of edges and color contrast. This, and then the brain's pattern completion. Excuse me. Let me paste this. Let me paste this first. Let me paste it. The brain's pattern completion machinery. Okay. Because remember, the brain does that thing like when we look at stuff, it'd be trying to find the face, look at the stars, and try to find animals. That's the pattern completion thing that the brain does. That's called the Ganzfeld, right? So they've done all the research on all this. But because in the crystal ball, there is no completion or edge, the brain's pattern completion machinery fills in the vacuum, generating a vivid, dreamlike imagery that can be projected onto that stone surface. So it's like, as you're looking into it and you start looking into your own eye, and I had a perfect picture of this because it's like what happens with Phi is that you start losing where is the beginning, where is the edge, where is the end. Let me see. I think I got it right here. Is this the one? Yeah, this is the one that moves. Let's see if it's going to move here. No, it won't even let me open the file because it's a WebP file. Let me show it on the screen real quick here. Still have this background going on, but it doesn't matter. So let's see. Close it. Open it up in the other one. Okay. So I happened to be looking at this the other day when I was doing the research of, something else that I was working on or funning on, as I call it. And as I started watching this, I started noticing that you can always see 3 levels at a time, but never 4. And then as I started watching it even further, I started realizing that it was more of like I was going down a stairway than that I was just looking at squares and triangles spreading out. But this took time. And which reminds me of why, the spiral and hypnosis and all that has always been synonymous. But it took time that after watching this, I felt like something was expanding, right? And that there was more knowledge here. And this is why certain powerful symbols in themselves become the knowledge. But what I'm expressing here is that there's this thing that happens with the eye where it shifts. And Dee is saying, and Kelly is saying in this case, that as they were looking at this crystal ball, that they could project that shift from their eye back into the ball and then through that see things. So it would be almost like you're your own feedback system. You want to learn something, it's in your eye already, and then looking through this, you can see it within your eye what you want to know. And this becomes like a spiritual conduit, right? Again, the thing about this stuff is I'm like, man, I'm gonna read some other stuff to you later on. We ain't even close to. We're a little bit close to being done, but not a lot. But there's some stuff I'm gonna read. You're gonna realize that even 300 years ago, they had went far beyond where the imaginations of the world we need to be living in per se is gone, even to this day. Meaning that the vision and the perspective of how the existence was seen was so much more vast than it is right now. And we can definitely say it's become like that because they were exposed to the mysteries. They went and learned directly from our ancestors. But what they gave back was a limited point of view and a controlled point of view. And then that blinded the world. And you're going to see it here in a moment. So the feedback loop, slow eye movements over a glossy surface. Let me get myself back on the screen here. Sorry about that. Slow eye movements over a glossy surface set up an autokinetic effect. Slight internal reflections act as a real-time visual noise. So you will see in this, when you start thinking different, things will shift inside of the reflection, proving that somehow you're controlling the reflection. So again, then you stop thinking about like surface stuff and you start asking questions, and then you're able to see the answer inside of the reflection because you contain the answer. So it goes on and it says that this noise giving the imagination raw material to organize into faces or symbols or what's called pareidolia, right? Which is, again, that ability to see within things, right? And I'll give that term here. So the astral light carrier, crystals hold vestiges of the first light. Why? We already showed why. Crystals been back so long. Even when you can think of the spark of creation, Crystal was there watching it. So in this way, the crystal holds vestiges of the first light. So they call that the angelic intelligences. And this is why I said there's a demarcation between the modern angels that they're talking about now, which is the eidolons and weird words, which is something that I'm going to talk about later on. Is there was actually words that were known to be misconfigured in the aethers, and those words became the demons. Why the angels or the benevolent ones became the perfected words, which balanced out the perfective numbers, right? But this system gets completely destroyed later on. But this is the source of them, the understanding of that the angels came before man and that they were perfect. But this still gives us this winged creature, you know what I mean? And that's not what we're talking about. Crystals are the angels, clearly. But this makes sense. Since last time, what were we talking about? Because there's 7 angels of God. But then we start looking at, hey, there's this crystal symmetry, and all the crystals either roll into one of these symmetric patterns. You see what I mean? So it's all there. Like if you wanted to sit down and reanimate the corpus of wisdom, you would see that, hey, the crystals are really the angels. They're the ones that are on the angle. And looking through these crystals, you would see into many different things that would cover the full spectrum, literally, of reality. Okay? Because every single stone that was perfected, which is, again, talking about like the Temple of Solomon and all the stones and stuff that they had, all these crystals and all this stuff, the rings, the jinns, the genies, the bottles, the lamps, all this stuff is all within this same mythos. Is that these crystals, though, they contain the essence of the first light. And in that way, they contain the intelligences, as they call it, angelic intelligences that ride. This is from the text. They ride that light into visibility. The speculum thickens the light. So forms can condense, meaning that so you would be able to actually see them. I'll repeat that again, and I've copied and pasted it here. Astral light carrier. Crystals hold the vestige of the first light. The angelic intelligence ride that light into visibility so you can see them. Other than that, it would be invisible. The speculum thickens so that the light so forms can condense. Okay, so we'll keep going. Now we talk about the mainframe. This is what came back from the query. Now remember, there was a book already about this kind of before John Dee, but John Dee uses it as a source to not only maybe learn from himself, but also to keep the show going. Okay. And in this, he was constantly taking pieces of the books, the works, and then bringing them into his real life works. And so in that way, he has like a manipulated replica of these mysteries. And again, these mysteries are only within the hands of very few, because either you're going to get killed by the Catholics, because all of this, Kelly lost his life to this, by the way. Like in the end, Dee got away because he was the real spy, but Kelly was interrogated and then they found out he's a spy and they killed him. So he died for this. You see what I mean? So it got real serious inside of the spy craft. But the knowledge in which that was brought forth, and we're going to talk about this here. Throw this on. Myself on the screen here. It leads to the future, spiritual perspective from many of the societies and ultimately into the religions. It reveals for one moment the potential of what we're even talking about, but the intelligence level would have to be much more higher before you would delve into something like this. Me even considering that they were working from a deceptive component means that a deceiver was amongst them. That's how this all works. So in no way could they potentially achieve what was discovered by them. Because remember, this was a book from 200 or 300 years ago. But what I did was I told the system, let's just assume we believe the angels. What are they saying that is possible? And this is what is said. So this was, suppose every word the angel spoke is true. If we take the communication at face value, we land in a rigorously layered reality model. This is what the system spits back. You have this second code layer, what it calls logeo. Okay, this was a word that Dee used. Actually, there's an L in front of that, excuse me. To the system itself. Okay, logeo is literally the speech of God. 49 pages times 49 rows times 49 cells encode the creative commands that instantiate space and time. Excuse me, I'm reading off of my notes. Let me forward everybody else's notes. Hold on. Let me read from my notes first, and then we'll go to what is here, because that could get very confusing. Let me just see if everything that I had. Let me see. Okay, yeah, we can start here. We'll do this. So the version control and eschatology. Okay, now this word eschatology means that you believe that there's an end of the world, and you study how that end of the world is going to come about. This is relatively new. The ancients never believed there was an end of the world. Never believed there was going to be any kind of rapture or anything like that. This was strictly a part of something that was introduced at another point. Let's say that 200 and 300 years ago, there became in that Christian tradition this idea that was fermenting that there was going to be an end of the world. Now, ultimately, this became where, as of today, Zionism is to bring about the end of the world by doing things that God would deem so heinous that it involves him stepping in. Okay. Even Candace Owens was talking about this. So this is so novice to know that inside of their sect, and I've mentioned this a few times, they believe that they know the things like they do with like all the different sites. I won't even say anything to keep it G-rated, all the different sites that you see and why there's a certain group of people that are always behind those kind of sites. A lot of the thievery, the money, the banking system, all this kind of stuff that seems to be utter evil. For those that are in the deepest of those sects, They believe that they are justified in doing those things because it is speeding the return of God, who comes when stuff just gets so bad. So they're attempting to provoke God. That's eschatology at its root. Okay? But it didn't exist. So this means that this has to be a projection. This has to be something others create. And that's why the jinn and the not all, again, when I say jinn, I'm not saying all jinn are evil, but the malevolent of them love this idea, because this was a way then to bring in a whole new level of fear and a whole new level of obedience. So let's read it. So the angels tell D that the current build of reality is approaching its end of life. Lagael holds the patch set. So notice how this is like an AI matrix mainframe in this way. That wasn't new. This predates, this is like already in the 1100s, they're aware that there's a matrix. It holds a patch set for the last age before the conclusion of the world. Human operators who master the keys can help roll out that final update. You see, that's the pinning point of their tradition, that they can bring about the end of the world. Hence the angels' urgency, which the previous text said were really evil spirits. Like, yo, you can bring about the end of the world. So it goes on. And it says the source code layer. Lagael is literally the speech of God. I read that earlier. 49 pages, 49 rows, 49 cells encoded with the creative commands that instantiate time and space. Each cell is polysemic. So the grid functions like a multidimensional array, holding every possible law of nature. Okay, so every action and reaction programmed already within the grid. Changes propagated here ripple downward as new dispensations of history, meaning that this would create Mandela effects. You would program from the top layer, but it would roll out and update all the existing layers below it. But every now and then you would get anomalies within corruptions of the code. Now, mind you, this is 1100s. Compiler layers in a 48 angelic key. The keys are executable calls. This is why they mention that, hey, angels are more like computer programs than they are like living, breathing entities. You give them the command, even though you must give the right one the right command, because each one can only fulfill a specific command. And then that command would happen. So it was never like angels were like these humanoid beings. What they really were codes that operated the matrix, because they contain within themselves the functions of the matrix and held that in a crystal, if you may, like solid, so that way it could be inhabited by what we are as spirit, souls, imagination, etc. So it goes on. The keys are executable calls that compile Lagael's code into specific output. Keys 1 to 18 address the Watchtower tablets. They compile elemental qualities, plasma, gas, liquid, solid, plus directional vectors into stable matter-energy relations. Key 19 is a master routine that compiles sectors of the aethers, granting the operator read and write access to higher dimensional memory blocks. Okay, so you're traveling now through the cosmos and coming into the process of realization through a procedural mathematical quotient, ma'at. Basically, that you're even to expect what comes next and know what comes next based on what are the numbers present. And you're also sitting in the framework, like where we're in the body. We're sitting in the framework of the master code. So you're basically programming your reality. It goes on. 4 27 by 27 cell matrices. Air east, fire south, water west, earth north, plus a 20-cell tablet of union. spirit form of a square processor that renders the observable universe. This is like that idea that when you look away, there is really no world behind you, or really when you go to sleep, that there was really no world anyway, because it's all being rendered. Maybe that's not how it's happening on this plane, right? Because this could be like one of those lower realities, depending on a person's vibration. But in the higher realities render. That means they just become like what you do when you rendering out a movie, or, when you're streaming something and it starts coming into view, that the reality renders in real time based on your projections, allowing you, and it says it goes on, each cell is tagged with a divine name and an angelic address, and invoking a name toggles the underlining bit, manifesting, dissolving, or rewriting a phenomena in the corresponding quadrant. So to change something in your past to affect your future, to rewrite things that supposedly happen, to now put you in a different state to how you're in the current present. You see what I mean? All of this before New Age, by the way, all this before it starts really getting heavily stepped on. So we'll finish this. It says operating the system layer, the 30 aethers. Visualize, and then kind of get some text here. It wants you to visualize the concentric hyperspheres, because it was going into like, this is how you would boot this up. You would visualize 30 concentric hyperspheres whose radii increase geometrically. That sounds like the flower of life. Each sphere hosts 3, sometimes 4 governors. These are angelic daemons that manage the input-output between the watchtower space and the abstract divine memory above, which is the void. Ascending from text 30 to Lil 1 is analogous to bootstrapping from a shell prompt up to the root access. So this is literally like a logical, computational way of understanding not only how the matrix works, but how to get in it, how to get out of it, how to alter things that happen in it, how to control what happens in the future of it, and how to rewrite what goes on in the past. Okay, this is what's being presented. I think the concept alone is enough. I'm not necessarily looking and saying, well, does it work? Let me go draw this star out on the ground. That's not what I'm saying, because in a minute, you're going to see all of this is already designed within. It's just the awareness that, well, if they were all lying, I don't think that this would be the story. Because the story contains some components that we've only come to figure out today, but 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 years ago. So it's either the story is not accurate, or the story is accurate and the story is, you know what I mean? It's basically that either what they're saying is true, or these men were extremely intelligent and were able to come up with a completely fake system that they derived on their own that actually spells out even how things like AI operate right now. And that's too far flung. Not to mention that we've already discovered that they didn't come with their original. They came with one that was written 300 years ago. So it proves, again, there's a matrix, but it also proves that there's a lot to learn for even this faction, which you'll see here in a moment. There's a lot to learn. Like, they've almost discovered nothing in discovering this, because there's so much more that needs to be learned that wasn't actually present in that time. But it does set the pace to form what later on becomes known as the Royal Society. Let's keep going here with the final information here. So there then is an application layer. The application layer in the security model. Okay, so this is still going forward with what is embedded within the system. The application layer, or the planetary and human consciousness. Souls incarnate at the intersections of the elemental grid. Check. That's what we call ley lines. And the lowest aether. Well, shows why Earth can get so trashy at times. Never mind. A human voice pronouncing an angelic key vibrates both the grid coordinate horizontal and the aether stack vertical, allowing consciousness to context switch into higher models, prophecy, miracle working, or in Kelly's case, alchemical projections. This is the ancestors singing in my world. This is why there's all these old folk songs and music. They're literally calling spirits home. I'll digress on that, but where else would you find basically human voices pronouncing angelic keys? Some people start thinking about ceremonial magic, Gregorian magic. But where my mind instantly goes is when they say, hey, she had a voice like an angel, or the mistress of speech, or where someone can sing so well, but they're singing a specific song, an ancient song. And this is like calling spirits home across the waters. It could be like a siren in itself, but letting you know what direction you should go into in that way. A security modulum, the Sigillum del Ameth, that's the one in the top right corner, again, originally being this one. The heptagonal seal is a hash of the 7 primary Logorth instructors. When placed under the table legs, it becomes a sandbox that isolates the working so corrupted packets, i.e. deceiving spirits, cannot spoof the operator's authority. I even had to take a moment on that one, like, huh? And it was literally like unpacking itself, like, okay, so 7, what you're calling distorted entities, demons, evil, whatever, what these are pathways that don't lead to these higher levels of advancements as you're going up through the aethers. What they are corrupted packets. This means like still a work in progress. For a developer, a corrupted package crashes software. So if a person technically has too many corrupted packets, they can't really upload a perfect. So it's almost like, it's like mining. This is the easiest way to explain it. It's like mining, but for perfect data. It's kind of like what they show in Severance, where you only are getting like a few cubes that are perfect out of 1,000. But the goal is to mine to get those perfect cubes. And then when you get one, you submit it to the system, right? And then in this way, it basically brings forth the next level of instructions. And when you can think of this on a level like, okay, well, generally when you get spiritual knowledge and that spiritual knowledge is accurate, it then leads you to the next level of instructions of what you need to be doing. You see what I mean? But if the packet is corrupted, which is what I'm saying with the spiritual systems now, is they have corrupt packets. So when you have corrupt packets, every time you try to submit to the system, like with Bitcoin, it's immediately going to say, no, your hash is... Your hash, we checked your hash against the original framework and it's invalid. So we can't accept it. This is similar to like what you would say is like your manifestations wouldn't happen. The angels wouldn't grant your prayers because the packet that you're using, the packet system is corrupted and bears no witness to the original construct. So it's like you submitted in a code, but your code is corrupt. It's like we don't understand what this means as an angel. Like perspective, like I don't understand what you're asking for because you're speaking in like corrupt packets, and so we can never upload this into the framework because what it would do is it would basically corrupt the entire system. So this is how you would keep the system secure, and that's why it says on the top, it says. Well, you can't see it because I'm in the way, but let me move it. On the top, it says it's like a security model. Like, how would you keep the perfection perfect while still having an imperfect world? Well, you never let the imperfect upload into the perfect. Perfect means that you would be able to alter your own reality. Let's desist on this because I'll prove this here in a point. And let's just continue. So let's finalize here that. So what D ultimately did was he put together this sigil and he said, yeah, in this sigil, which actually ends up coming out to being a bunch of planetary genie. I did a big breakdown of this with AI using visual, and it basically laid out the entire world as far as what we call the matrix. One thing that it did note is that the two most powerful beings here are actually chained themselves to the crescent of the moon and how the moon moves in phases through time. And so there's a lot to be decoded here. I actually will probably save it for next Tribe Vibes. But within this sigil, which again was a much more older sigil, it actually laid out how the entire matrix is constructed and how the entities and the elements move, et cetera, right? And then I found that to be very interesting because even the color scheme was exactly the same as some of these much more older Renaissance images where they're kind of showing somewhat of the same thing, where there is like an evocation happening, there are sigils happening, there's the world, there's the angels. But many people think that this, and there's the throne, right? But someone would take this for face value and be like, yeah, we're invoking entities, when really this is like looking at a body where the throne is in the crown of your head and the crystals are there and the programming of the world and the codes in the circle. You see what I mean? And even the keys that are around what looks like the globe and the octaves and all that would be embedded within a symbol, but then only an initiate could read it. And that brings us to the next point, which I call the master plan. And I'll just kind of read this because I got a little exhausted of creating like text things, even though I figured out a way to make AI do it at the last moment. But I'm going to read this to you, and it kind of goes deeper into what I want to ultimately show you in the build today. Let me see. Okay, so let me start here. So the master plan, I call it. Actually, I think I had this. Yeah, I do have it. Okay. I guess I've been working at night. Okay. So following the angelic directives to shape world affairs. Okay. So second, something's happening on my timer here. There we go. Dee genuinely believed that the angels and the messengers directed human agents, monarchs, scholars, occultists to advance a unified Protestant front. He saw himself as a spiritual architect, laying the groundwork for a global Protestant victory over the church and necessary prelude to the second coming. Okay, so what I'm mentioning here or pointing out here is that so Dee literally worked on the framework to usurp the Catholic Church and to create a new religion, fusing in enough of the old traditions, but actually to end the world and start a new one, kind of like Dr. Love Strange. And this is another thing that had come up too. That was another, it just came out of nowhere. And I ended up looking at it last week. And it was because we were watching something and James Earl Jones has come on the screen. And I was explaining to Jeanette, I was like, yo, it would be him. You know, he was the voice of Darth Vader. And, you know, I talked to her a little bit about it. And then I was like, I wonder, you know, what his first movie was that he played in. And this is James Earl Jones. And it turned out to be Dr. Strangelove. He was inside of the plane in Dr. Strangelove. Many have not seen this movie, and, you know, I don't blame you on why not, because it's super old. But for my old heads out there, you know, I remember seeing clips of this movie and just being not like really interested in watching it because it's in black and white. But this time I was in because I was like, yo, this movie, Dr. Strangelove, has come up again. Let me see what this movie is really about and what James Earl Jones was doing in the movie. And so anyway, in this movie, they show one particular character towards the end, especially who is Dr. Strangelove. And Dr. Strangelove has this Nazi-like vision clearly to restart the world and to begin it by them repopulating the world, that it's only going to take like 200,000 people and 10 men, 200,000 women or something like this, and 10 men to basically repopulate the world within a certain amount of time. And because the generals and everybody are so hedonistic, masculine and masochistic, etc., they like this idea. But every single agent that's being imported into this theory and theme, even the rocket builders, etc., are all coming out of, in this case, Nazi Germany, which we know to be true because that was Project Paperclip. Also, as an addendum, the Mossad book explained also something that I didn't know, which was that when the war ended, many of those second-rate rocket scientists were recruited into Egypt. because at that time, Egypt held the most power in the region as far as the Middle East and was really the force to reckon with. That sounds very interesting, stuff that we don't think about in history, that Egypt still reigned in that region, still being run by new rulers, but as an adversary to the Zionists up until only just shortly, and recruited, just like the United States recruited some of the scientists and rocket scientists to continue to help them build the weapons. So again, when we even look at the governments today, which we find the intelligence agency, is, according to Whitney Webb, are actually, my goodness, the term, syndicates, old crime families, back since the Medicis and all of that. That's what these intelligence agencies actually are. Just so you understand, well, who are these intelligence? Are they run by the government? No, they are crime families that have been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. So the mastery and killing and drugs and all that kind of stuff, this is now coalesced into like the intelligence department that seems like almost like police in certain ways, but really what they're policing is to make sure nobody else is getting in on the action that they don't have within their construct. That sounds wild, but again, it proves to be absolutely true. She connects all the dots and shows. So again, even when we're talking about intelligence agencies, we're talking about old mob families, old crime families that kept moving up the charts, like all that money, all that influence, all that blackmail, all that treachery, all that spycraft, all of that still coalesces into the intelligence organizations in different parts of the world, because every part of the world has its own intelligence organizations, right? And many of them are feared. And so there's always been a spy versus spy going on back and forth between what you would say is the Jews and what you would say is the Arabs, and then what you would say is also the Chinese, and what you would say is the Russians, and what you would say is the, you know, I don't know what you would call the people in the United States. It's like the citizens of the United States are one thing. The people who really control the United States are another. And you should definitely see it as that. And in that way, again, you have this whole invisible world of spycraft going on, sometimes even under the guise of spirituality. Let's read it here. So it goes on. Let me go to my next slide. Oh, here's just an image of Dee and Kelly performing a seance inside of a cemetery. It's a well-known symbol or a well-known image. And then we continue. In his final years, Dee joined Prague's court of Emperor Rudolf II, spearheading an alchemical movement. Give me 1 second. My slides are set to 5 seconds. Give me 1 second. Thought I had modified all of them. Let's go 10. Let's apply to all this. Okay. So in his final years, Dee joined Prague's court of Emperor Rudolf II, spearheading an alchemical reform movement steeped in his angelic systems. By 1614, his ideas were distilled, often anonymously, into the Rosicrucian Manifesto by Johann Valentine André. These pamphlets promulgated an invisible college. Okay, so this is the beginning of the invisible college, which later on was the Royal Society. An invisible college of enlightened adepts, marrying science, sacred geometry, Kabbalah, and angelology into a utopian blueprint that would influence, this would be future Francis Bacon's New Atlantis and later the Royal Society. Okay, so this gives you everybody. This gives you Shakespeare. This gives you Mendeleev. This gives you all of those who, even the Enlightenment era, the Royal Society, all this is all the same nucleus. Okay, so you can understand that this is the beginning of the formation of secret society as we know it today. André's works and Bacon's utopian vision seeded networks of esoteric lodges, proto-Rosicrucian Masonic, then scientific, that covertly steered intellectual and political currents across Europe and eventually the Atlantic world. In Dee's hands, occult communication became statecraft, and a hidden architecture of symbols and societies aimed at remaking Christendom into a Kabbalistic Protestant mode, the Invisible College became the Royal Society. This is where the projections get big. So now time is going on. Again, this eventually creates Freemasonry. This is Scotland. This is Ireland. This creates it ultimately the Illuminati later on. But there's a lot of overthrowing. Because remember, the D in the beginning was taking work from somewhere else. So this got out of his hands really early. Like now you have nobles joining societies, which became the Royal Society, right? So if we look at even the Royal Society is even up to this very day. So this is not like something that, it's like, oh, and then we don't know whatever happened, right? So even here, okay, I see. There we go. So even here, we see the Royal Society of London, right? And it's still going to this very day. It still has a treasurer, still has all the fellows. It still has all the secretive initiatory things happening. It still has all the knights. It still has the kings that were in league with it. It has some of the most illustrious people that are known inside of this modern, especially European history, like Sir Isaac Newton, right? So all of the context to science that we know today is coming from this faction. They were spending millions of dollars in earlier times building this whole construct. Even Stephen Hawking was a fellow at the Royal Society, right? So it goes on and still goes on with people that have gotten Nobel Peace Prizes, etc. But where did it all begin? Like now it looks like almost like a museum, and people speak of it as that, well, the Royal Society, all the fellows and the gentlemen, and they make a couple movies about it, right? Which are like, fanciful movies like James Bond kind of stuff. That's all the Royal Society kind of stuff. However, this goes way more deeper, and it actually is at the core of the spiritual beliefs of today. And this is because, and I'm just going to read this off, and then I'm going to have one final thing. But I want you to know the logical progression here. So we have John Dee's Enochian blueprint, right? So he becomes the advisor of Elizabeth II. He uses the Enochian magic and occult communications with angelic intelligence to craft the Kabbalistic blueprint for then the global Protestant hegemony, which again later on becomes the root to all the secret societies, a framework entirely foreign to the early New Testament teaching. So he completely overhauls all of it. Then Johann Valentine Andrea becomes, who's basically the father of the Rosicrucian Manifesto. In 1614, Andrea, he publishes this manifesto, but it basically has the works of John Dee inside of it. These texts systematically introduce rituals and doctrines not found in the original scripture or the original text. Then it gets passed on to Bacon, who is very related also to fellows like Shakespeare. Bacon writes The New Atlantis and Solomon's House, which I'll show you here in just a minute. And then Bacon's novel, The New Atlantis, which describes Solomon's House, is an invisible college of esoteric scientists blending Kabbalah and natural philosophy effectively, and then seeding the notion of a hidden Christian elite directing the world affairs, okay? And then it goes from there that the Invisible College becomes the Royal Society. So Andre's Rosicrucian Network and Bacon's vision coalesce into the Invisible College, which formerly became the Royal Society in 1647, institutionalizing Kabbalistic underpinnings with the modern scientific institution. And then Manasseh ben Israel in the Hartlib Circle in the 1655 in the Whitehall Conference with Cromwell. And this is the whole breakup of the English Empire, where King James basically loses to Cromwell. They basically bring in an explicit esoteric political scheme, which again is absent from any of the Christendom and the stuff that they know of then. So they instill what appears to be a new religion. Then Isaac Lapierre's Proto-Zionist tract. I'm just going to speed through these. So in 1648, a book, De Rupel des Juifs, lays out the theological groundwork for the Kabbalistic restoration of Israel. directly influencing Manasseh ben Israel's later plans. Then Peter, the Sabbatean. So this is moving through time. Now we're in 1666. Sabbatean's false messianic movement. Then he begins to rewrite the Christian eschatology far beyond the New Testament prophecy. Some of the books become altered, and then concepts like the rapture, which weren't currently present in the Bible, become introduced into the Bible and into scripture, into theological concept. Then Johann Rotligs and Giovanni Pico's Mirandola, Giovanni Pico della Mandarola, okay, integrated Hebrew mystical texts into Christian theology, creating a syncretic esoteric tradition that reshaped doctrines such as the nature of the Trinity and sacraments, which are absent in the earlier Christian teachings. Then Martin Luther catches it. You see what I mean? So it's like, it's going from one powerful individual to another, but it's building. Luther's break with Rome was abetted by a secret Rosicrucian lodge in Nuremberg. It led by his confession, Johann von Skopitsch, which infused Kabbalistic rituals into becoming the Protestant orthodoxy. Judah Manis and the geometry-driven Trinity. Harvard's first Hebrew professor, he goes in, I'm not going to just keep going in on this, but this eventually gets to Manly P. Hall's American occult myth-making, which is the 20th century occultist Manly P. Hall declared America as the living fulfillment of Bacon's New Atlantis, perpetuating esoteric Kabbalistic ideas with the national mythos rather than based on scripture. Then by the end, this actually, the date was incorrect, I double checked it, but 70 million shekels then went into the labor unions, the academic groups, the religious Hillel emissaries, and they waged a war on consciousness via digital propaganda and shaping the online reality far behind any biblical framework, right? But it was to push this one idea. And this idea, which was the idea that you can say that just like in the movie Dr. Lovestrange, there were sympathetic ears to this idea. And you're going to see why. This is the projection in which he creates. To me, this is the pinnacle of the speech today that I'm having with you. This thought experiment is to see how, again, all the concepts since they began, even with Dee's projections, were all big. This is what made it so easy to be adopted by people who control things, the royals, the ruling parties, because it was even bigger than the ideas that they had conceived. So this is what I was saying. The bigger vision always wins. So when you create a vision, you should make sure it encompasses some of the most important things in the reality. So this goes on of a projection of a vision called The House of Solomon by Sir Francis Bacon. And this is published so you can read this. Erected by King Salomona as an order or society, right? Which for sure, I see more and more that Solomon as a term is the code word for this society because it puts things onto a certain side. Solomon doesn't connect into the Arabic traditions in the way in which all the ancient kings do. It's like an offshoot code word for, we're talking about that, basically the root in on Zionism. That's code Solomon, okay? The noblest foundation that ever was upon the earth. The projection starts big. And the lanthorn of this kingdom, it is also called the College of the 6 Days of Work, alluding to the biblical creation week. Strategic isolation. Salomona banned ordinary overseas travel, but every 12 years dispatched 2 royal ships, each carrying 3 fellows of the Solomon house, whose only cargo is books, instruments, and patterns of every kind. Peep how they be on them patterns. Gathered worldwide, trading only for God's first creature, which was light. So they traded for light. I can't even go with you on that right now. The end of our foundation is the knowledge of causes and secret motions of things, and the enlarging of the bounds of the human empire to the affecting of all things possible. So this is like the charter, the mission. I'll read it again. This is the House of Solomon's charter and mission. The end of our foundation is the knowledge of causes and secret motions of things. That's what we're talking about. Celestial movements, patterns, weights, measures, and the enlarging of the bounds of the human empire. So this is like total conquest of the human over nature. You're going to see it here in a moment. To the affecting of all things possible. So everything must be brought into the dominion of the human. The region house. Now listen. The lower region, the caves, this is the lower house. This is the structure of the whole house. At the lower levels, there is coagulation. This is what is being taught and trained on. Coagulation, refrigeration, artificial metals, okay? Like space metals are artificial metals. They're what they call them, alloys. I think, ask our brother Eric, right? They have metals that they make that contain then the properties of two different metals. Like when copper was mixed with brass or steel was mixed with brass in order to create like the powers of both of those metals. They have disease cures and longevity hermitages. The upper region, this is 1/2 mile tower on the mountain. There will be isolation, experiments, meteorology, astronomical observation, and hermit observations, hermit observatories, right? Because when you're observing the stars, people shouldn't be around per se. They're just distracting you. You have to focus on these things. So you have to be isolated, looking under these microscopes for all your life, damn near, like the Essenes. Lakes and pools and bays. This is what's to happen there. There should be aquatic burials. I still couldn't figure that out. Desalination, salination, sea air laboratories, artificial wells and water of paradise, mineral springs, medicinal infusion, and life extension water. Meteor houses and chambers of health. Controlled snow, thunder, lightning, air quality, therapy rooms. Baths that cure disease and give bodily strength. Orchards and gardens, off-season fruiting, grafting, new plant creation, and medicinal botany. Parks and enclosures, vivisection, resuscitation studies, poisons, selective breeding, and hybrid animals. Dispensaries and diverse furnaces, pharmacology, long fermentations, graduated heat regimes. Perspective houses, optics, color science, telescopy, microscopy, light synthesis. Sound houses, quarter tones, voice synthesis, acoustic engineering, long distance sound. Now remember, we've been talking about some of this. We've talked about the anomalies and the curved roof. You hear the voice in your ear. Spoke on how, as acoustical engineer in an amphitheater, you know about all these little weird quirks with sound. So they've surmised an entire vision where all of these sciences and even things that you haven't really thought of would be all within a house, would be all within a new facility that will usher in a new world. And the new world would consist of these things. Perfume houses, artificial odors and flavors, and gastronomic chemistry. This is like Willy Wonka. You see what I mean? Like every single taste that you can think of can be artificially induced and created within engine houses, high velocity projectiles, perpetual motion, submarines, flight prototypes. So remember, this was a blueprint that you're starting to see this was checked off the list. But imagine again, there are things going on in the background where there is those who aspire to reach these levels. And again, things are getting checked off the list. They got that high velocity projectile for sure down pat. They were using those yesterday. But I'm just saying, this is not mythological. It's things that they perceived would automatically be possible based on what they discovered as they're sequestering all the knowledge from the land, because that's what the Royal Society did. That's those pictures I was showing earlier where you get these super extensive charts and you get these drawers with every single creature in the world inside of them. But the goal is also to understand how it's made and then to even alter it and to create hybrids of it, not only from the metal, but also to the animals even. And even the sensory system, as you'll see here, mathematical house, precision instruments for geometry and astrology, the houses of deceit. I love the way they call it that. The houses of deceit of the senses, controlled illusions, anti-hoax training, like how not to get the rabbit pulled over you, what is the wool pulled over your eye, an anti-hoax training. Imposter strictly forbidden. Imposture strictly forbidden, right? So finalizing here, we have the region house, the lower region. I think I went through this. Let me see, coagulation, refrigeration, caves. Yes. So this is the finalization of the projection. I think there was actually one more little slice, but I'll leave that for the notes. And also, I wanted to explain to you, so what did I derive from all of this? Okay. What I derived is that I need to set up a new system, first of all. I was like, okay, I'm going to make it one of my agendas to, one, first of all, restore the antiquity without any judgment. Remove all the characters, just bring forth the sciences, if you may, because it's getting a little murky, especially within the secret societies and the cults, and also because they fight each other so much, Arab versus Jew versus China versus all of the scriptures in relation to these mysteries are almost completely personalized for each culture, and thus omit certain mysteries or become all out confusing for somebody else from another culture. So I have to go to the basis. So then I started researching what would be the basis, but just me and AI. I actually mentioned to AI that it's probably possible that all the spiritual text is contaminated. And that if we were to redo the system, we would need to consider the following things. And I gave it things like the numbers that we discussed, the cyclic numbers. I gave it things like prime numbers, which I come to find to be also a big part of the code that was being uncovered within the sigil, is that they basically discovered, and I have a picture of it here. Pull that picture. Come on, man. All day. Where's the picture? Okay, it's not going to be there. It's going to be here. Let me just drop this picture in real quick, because it's like the math side of this reveals the truth. And that's why the math starts getting shrouded into spirituality very fast. And then all of a sudden a personality is given to the numbers. And while the personalities are a bit accurate, it's also creating somewhat of a cloudiness with what we're actually discussing. And meaning that, so let me just get to the point here. So in the end, I'll get to the end and then try to jump back to the beginning of what I'm trying to explain here, because it's getting a little difficult for me to explain. Let me just get the charts. Go here. Go here. Okay. Let me put this on the screen, because then it'll be easier for you to understand what I uncover by following along with what I end up doing with what I uncovered. So it turned out that language and math, what you would say is like gematria, math, Fibonacci sequences, prime numbers, planetary mathematical squares, etc., all are revealing a code. I can't say that I was successful in completely extracting that code because there was an error in the data. That error is that the AI automatically assumed words we use that are bad words are innately bad. and thus deviated from numerical perfection to support the theological perception of the number. Okay, so what am I saying? I'm saying that inherently, according to our traditions, numbers like 6 are evil. Okay, let me just put it that way. AI picked up on this. But from a mathematical level, there are many things that are perfect about the number 6. So you had to choose right away. Did you want to go with the theos of what they say is a good thing and a bad thing? Or did you want to base that wholly on what the numbers say is a good thing and a bad thing? And I found that to be interesting right away. I found words that we use in common language that mean good, like Michael, actually meaning in certain ways the worst of the angels. You see this classification of bad here? So AI basically revealed that the words that we use that are supposed to be bad are good, and the words that we use that are supposed to be good are bad. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. How did you come to this conclusion? And it basically, to not make this super complicated, was showing that spirituality or the teaching of religious studies became a way to invert the true teachings of the numbers in nature. Now, I can't say I don't agree, because that's exactly what I feel like happened from everything that I see, that religion came and created like an upside down version of it. So everything that you believe there that is good is really like the bad thing to believe. And what AI did was confirm that through numbers. And these numbers were based on all of the secret numbers that appear in math and throughout cultures. Let me see if I can find this really quickly of where these numbers come from. Just give me a quick second since I have this open. That the numbers are pulled from here. Meaning that when you want to understand what is the basis, Seven, of what what would be a good and a bad, what are we basing that on? Because that's what I was strangling AI. I was like, how can we insist that there's a good and a bad? AI was saying more of like, listen, the creation is literally good and bad, or literally two opposing forces, which we've come to learn. And creation happens at the intersection points. But what had already been discovered in math is that all prime numbers and all auspicious numbers intersect at a certain point. So thus, if you took all of those numbers and then mapped them back to the language and then used that as a way to determine whether the word was good or evil, what you would end up coming up with is something like a scoring system, where certain numbers would be more powerful or names would be more powerful than others, while other letters and numbers would make it different. You see what I mean? And that what there was a constant thing going on is a way to actually find the most powerful letters and numbers that were still good. And I crawled over this for a long time. First, extracting the most beneficent and the most wicked words. And on the wicked side, ranking all-time number one was mammon, which happens to be the biblical word for money. It's called out as mammon. They say, hey, you can either serve God or you can serve mammon, right? Now, again, because the texts are so conflagrated, God doesn't offer you any relief either. But at least we have come to identify that the God of the world, if it was configured as a name, this would be his name. You see what, or its name. And it's not based on that it is a actual like a entity as we would see it, but more so than bad numbers. And when you would get bad numbers, what you would get is desolation. You wouldn't land in the places where the horizontal and the vertical meet, meaning that you wouldn't land in the place where things find their balance. You would continue to land in the place and where they would be like distorted. Okay. So I didn't have much more time that I spent, which was a few hours, on redeveloping even the software. I tried to even do it before the TriVibes, but I knew how to do this, but it was just going to take me time. I was being led exactly to what I needed to do and how it could never be challenged, but that it needed to be done properly. So I didn't want to really rush it. But in the end, that this, what you're seeing on the screen, every intersection point that you're looking at maps out to a number. But this, what you're seeing, is the natural pattern of everything's I Ching, if you may. It's lifespan, it's ascension and descension. And at every single point, like we learned earlier today, which gives us a little bit more verbiage about the language of God, if you may, or the nests of creation and how to move around those packets, that those packets were encoded here. And that, again, you could map the packet. I had to take a step back, because even when I was doing this in English, I realized that we had a more of an authentic system within the Gematria, Kabbalistic Gematria through Hebrew, since the letters have what we talked about a few weeks before, which was the letters of unity versus the letters of division. So rather than using English, which is a conflagrated language within itself, it's like it's a lesser language, it's a lesser pattern, a lesser matrix, that I should at least start with one that geometrically bears the truth to what it is. So I don't have to trust that this is a good letter, this is a bad letter. I could prove that based on the pattern itself. And that's when I said, you know what, we should go back, because we should just create the patterns. Because then the patterns themselves, as you see here, like it says sigils, right? Because this was designed to create the pattern of the word. But once I realized that the core code to this, which is English, wouldn't really deliver completely what I wanted to create, I backed off, because all I need to do is change a couple lines of code, reintegrate the system in which I want to integrate, teach the AI real briefly what the Gematria and the numbers mean, which will only be a second, and then have it re-output that in a language that I can actually say opens and closes in that way. English, you wouldn't technically be able to do that perfectly. And so while it can reveal certain things about the matrix, if you may, and how the matrix is constructed with the English words, it can't take me all the way in understanding so I can see. Because what I believe is going to happen is I will see what I already have. Like either it would be the Adinkras or something of this nature. And then it would just completely confirm, like finally confirm, because that's what I also look for, is like, I need final confirmation. So what I should get back from this without it using any of what we have beside the language, I should be able to see a pattern that I then recognize somewhere else. And as I said, it comes up over and over again about how important these patterns or these shapes actually are, and how they're a higher level of communication. So today, again, rather than it being like a classic TriVibes, I felt that it was a thought experiment. It was our ability to go through what could be so encoded, so loaded, not only with benefits, but also even with deceit, in order to extract ultimately the higher levels of awareness that were present even in these times, to reveal ultimately what and why the world is the way that it is right now. So I know for sure, because I see it all over the place, because I happen to just be awake and aware, that this agenda of eschatology and ending this, and the idea of the end of the world and of Christ coming in a rapture, is the program billions of people almost are running on now. We can't even say millions. It's billions of people are running on this program. What if they knew that the program wasn't even real? That's crazy. Like, even I thought the rapture was really a biblically proven. I thought they had enough. You see what I mean? But they have nothing. Not to mention that even Freemasonry, which it claims to be so old, wasn't even around even before this time, and that one man's idea and vision starts growing and becoming the adaptation for others' men's ideas and their vision. and then feeding them a little ideas from Solomon's house. Beside where the girl's going to be at, they had pretty much everything and lived forever over there. You see what I mean? So these kind of ideas and these projections ultimately not just became mythology. It actually became actuality. It became even what they aspired to continue to do. And I don't doubt that whether it's 1,000 leagues under the sea or somewhere high on the top of a mountain in a remote place, that they built this place. But I can tell you for sure that it wasn't for everybody to be there, because that's not how they roll. So visions start to become perfecting even these kind of ideals, also remove so much of the artificial droid that has the lifeless, spiritless aspects that have also been put into it. But to create a new vision, or actually you would just be restoring the old vision in which a time where all the treasures of the world were stored within one place, your center. And that was what gave you substance. And so for me, it wasn't just a story, it was an adventure. And then it wasn't just an adventure when it became very factual, and it became something that even changed the way on how I see things now. So meaning that I can read something, learn something, ingest something, and allow that to make a different person, even within a week or a few days. And after even reading that book that I was mentioning earlier, when I realized how they move, I realized exactly how much I needed to even step it up. And how much even a lot of the, just the extra stuff that goes on that doesn't really have any weight for the legacy and sovereignty just needed to be erased altogether and rewritten. And also just how much power we have right now, again, within superintelligence and within our spiritual intelligence, to be able to restore this ancient knowledge that even a word can change things that you didn't necessarily want to be a part of in this reality, to alter what the future of you is like, to be able to go into your own framework and make those adjustments to open the beyond.
Well, it's part of the dishonesty. It's part of the dishonesty of the West, part of the dishonesty in the West that's encoded into the cultural DNA of the West, Western so-called civilization. It's part of their dishonesty for them to say, for example, the problem is capitalism. This is part of the allowable discourse to say something like this. This is part of the controlled discourse. You can say capitalism has ruined everything. The problem is capitalism. Capitalism is evil. The capitalist system is evil. So then you have, after that, you have whatever else there is, Marxism, socialism, communism, blah, blah, blah. It's the system. So let's change the system. This is how they address the problems in their society. Let's change the system. No, the system didn't make you like this. You understand? You made the system this way because you are like this. And you're going to do the same thing to any other system that you come up with. The problem isn't the system. The problem is the operators of the system. And this is what you're not supposed to talk about. This is outside the accepted discourse. This is outside the parameters of accepted discourse, allowable discourse. Because of course it is. And this is really and truly criminal. It's criminal what this the so-called Western civilization has done to its people. It's like if you have diabetes, say, you have diabetes and you go to doctor after doctor after doctor, and each doctor tells you that, well, you just have a stomach flu. Or they tell you, you're just stressed. So then they give you all sorts of different types of prescriptions for those problems that never treat the real problem. And then you just get sicker. That's what's going on in the West. You're not allowed to ever get an accurate diagnosis about what's wrong with you. So if you can't get an accurate diagnosis, then you can never get proper treatment. And I understand this to some extent because the real diagnosis for the West is catastrophic. And most people can't face it. So you just go through your whole life basically in a state of chronic disease and temporary painkillers because your own society is never going to tell you the truth. They're never going to tell you the truth about what's going on. They're never going to tell you the truth about what's going on with you, what's wrong with you. But for everyone outside, we have to be very clear about what your condition is, about what your real condition is. Everybody outside needs to understand this. And this is especially true for any Muslims, particularly who live in the West. I mean, really anyone from the global south who lives in the West, but particularly for Muslims who live in the West. In fact, obviously, it's very important for every Westerner to understand, Muslim or non-Muslim. It's very important for you to understand. But frankly, I have long since concluded that they never will. And to a great degree, they literally cannot. They literally cannot understand because, again, that in and of itself is symptomatic of the condition that you have. It's symptomatic of the condition itself. But suffice it to say, you do not live in the society you think you live in. Your so-called civilization is not what you thought it was. And that's why so many of you in the West, Muslim and non-Muslim, why you feel like you're going crazy over there. Why you feel depressed, why you get depressed, why you feel isolated, why you feel so strange in your society. Why, for instance, you can't understand how everyone around you can act normal while there's a genocide being committed by your country. Because you think, or you thought, that your society, your so-called civilization, you thought that it's different from what it really is. And this is what your problem is. This is where your problem lies. And this is why you have such deeply painful cognitive dissonance. Because Diddy, for example, Epstein, and the rest of them, you have to understand they are not abominations in your society. They're not aberrations in your society, and that's the truth. They are not anomalies. People like that are actually embodiments of your culture. They're embodiments of your so-called civilization. They're not strange. And if those criminals actually shock and disgust you, it's only because you have been lied to, and you lied to yourself, and you believe those lies about the society that you live in and the so-called civilization that you come from. Because these people are not monsters in your society. They're not monsters in your civilization. They are representatives of your society, a society that is itself monstrous. And again, it's not monstrous because of the system. It's not monstrous because of capitalism. It's not monstrous because of corporations. And Marxism is not going to fix it. Socialism is not going to fix it. Communism is not going to fix it. Feminism is not going to fix it. Red pill is not going to fix it. Okay? Liberalism is not going to fix it. Conservatism is not going to fix it. The system that you created is not the problem. The problem is in the people who created the system. Understand? The problem is the whole cultural context, the whole so-called civilizational context in which those systems were created. The cultural context that created the people who created the systems. That's where your problem lies. The problem is the so-called civilization itself. And you have to understand that anything and everything that comes out from that so-called civilization is going to carry that same sickness. It's going to carry the same sickness, the same infection, the same disease, and that's just a fact. You like to tell yourself in the West, and Muslims also like to say this, that the corruption is some sort of a new phenomenon in the West. And I'm telling you, no, it's not new at all. Not at all. It's not because of Trump, okay? It's not because of Biden. It's not because of the Republicans. It's not because of the Democrats. It's not because of Obama. It's not because of Hillary. It's not because of Larry Fink. It's not because of the World Economic Forum or whatever else you might think of. I mean, you can't keep telling yourself that this corruption and this wickedness in your society is the fault of anything or anyone that your society itself produced. You also can't keep telling yourself the lie that the situation is the same everywhere, that corruption exists in all societies. No, corruption exists in good societies, yes. Corruption exists in good societies, but that's completely different than the West. Because in the West, the opposite is true, meaning that some good exists in that corrupt society as opposed to some corruption existing in good societies. They're not the same. You know, it's like saying that a bucket of water that has a drop of mud in it is the same as a bucket of mud that has a drop of water in it. No, they're not the same. They're not the same at all. You know, a weed and a flower might both grow from the same soil, but that doesn't make them identical by any means. But this is what I mean about never accepting any accurate diagnosis. You're never going to accept an accurate diagnosis because you don't want to know. And to a certain extent, like I said, I don't really blame you because the diagnosis is actually quite catastrophic. Because the truth of the matter is, whether you want to hear it or not, the truth of the matter is, the West, so-called civilization, is a so-called civilization that worships the devil. Yes, and it always has. From prehistory right up until today, it always has. It has been immersed in a deep and abiding relationship with the jinn. I mean, I know you've been taught to reject this whole concept about the jinn and what have you. I know that. But that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Your beliefs anyway are completely incoherent. That's the truth. The only belief, in fact, the only belief that you have been rigidly trained to dismiss and to scoff at is the only belief that's true. That's the one that you've been trained to reject. Everything else is fine. You can believe in horoscopes, manifestation, extraterrestrials, ghosts, good luck, bad luck, deja vu, tarot cards, Myers-Briggs tests, eugenics, white supremacy, and democracy. You can believe in all of these sorts of delusional superstitions, fantasies, conspiracy theories, paranormal, supernatural, all sorts of oddities, fantasies. That's fine. You can believe in all of those things, except for the actual truth. That you're not allowed to believe in. You can believe in everything across the spectrum, any and all types of beliefs across the full spectrum. You know, you can believe that we're living in a simulation. You can believe in a multiverse. You can believe in timeline jumping, portals, multi-dimensional portals, all of that stuff. You can believe in all of that. That's fine. You can believe that a man is born in a woman's body and a woman is born in a man's body and so on and so forth. And you can even believe that you live in the freest and most wonderful society that ever existed. All of these crazy myths and fantasies and delusions, you have no problem believing, and everyone accepts it if you believe that. Everyone is fine if you believe that. Even atheism, you can believe in that kind of utter nonsense. But you are programmed, you are rigidly, strictly programmed to mock and to dismiss that the devil exists and that your society worships the devil, that the jinn are real, and that your so-called civilization has always been intertwined with the jinn. I mean, from its very inception. This is a fact. I mean, look at that. You're absolutely obsessed with constantly shifting the blame for your evil. I've talked about that many times. You're always trying to shift the blame. You're going to say that the problem is capitalism. You're going to say the problem is the Jews. You're going to say the problem is this, the problem is that, and so on and so forth. You're always looking for a scapegoat. You're always looking for any way to avoid assigning blame to yourselves, but you don't want to do, the last thing that you want to do is assign blame to Shaitan. You absolutely reject even the concept of assigning blame to Shaitan. You'll assign blame to the universe before you'll assign blame to Shaitan. But it's obvious. It's obvious to really everyone else in the world because no one else has a problem believing in the existence of Shaitan. I mean, your society is exactly what you would expect a society to look like that had been engineered and had been managed and had been developed by the devil. Honestly, there's no society in history that has been a purveyor of so much immorality, so much cruelty, so much carnage, so much rank sadism and degradation. And that's a fact. It's absolutely stunning when you look at the history. And someone has to tell you. Someone has to tell you. Jinn are real. And you've been messing with the jinn literally for millennia in Europe, in the West. You know, in Islam, we recognize that nations inherit and they transmit their moral character across millennia, across generations. And Europe's early formative period was a fusion of scarcity-driven ethics and jinn instruction. The later empires and philosophies and cultural norms of the West, of Europe, can all just be seen as the matured version or the matured form of that early corruption, just rationalized and technologized, but completely consistent spiritually. I mean, look, prehistorical Europe was an unforgiving, harsh landscape. You had long winters, you had limited edible fauna and flora and fauna. You had low population density. You had a very tough beginning. Europeans had a very tough beginning. I've talked about this many, many times. In this desolation and in this scarcity, that drove you towards a value system that prioritized aggression, that prioritized cunning and opportunism over, for example, cooperation and justice. And as a population whose, what you can call their survival values already leaned towards brute force and towards resource domination, violence and cruelty, your worst instincts were codified into a sort of a spiritual code. I mean, just look at all your myths, all the old European myths. The harsh environment combined with a lack of any sort of real moral restraint, that created a doctrine that you still live by until today, which is might makes right. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us in the Quran that there were those from among mankind who sought refuge with the jinn. And you know from your own history, from your own legends, from your own practices, from your own folklore, that you did that. You absolutely did that from the earliest periods, all across the continent of Europe. Oh, you didn't call them jinn. Of course not. You didn't call them jinn, but that's what they were. They were jinn. You know, you called them whatever, spirits, gods, fairies, what have you. But this is jinn. This is shayateen. This is the devil. These are devils, demons. You encountered them in forests, in caves, and in the mountains, and so forth. This isn't me saying so. You understand? This is in your own history. You know this already. In the history of your own European cultures, in your customs, in your folk tales, in your folklore. It's all there. In exchange for protection, protection from predators and rival tribes and from famine and so forth, the jinn demanded your veneration and your obedience, and you gave it to them. This is according to you. So your scarcity-hardened morals got supernatural validation. Again, just look at the anthropology of Europe. I'm not making it up. I'm just explaining it to you in the context of Islamic thought, Islamic understanding. And we call it, in Islam, we call it what it is. It's devil worship. No more, no less. You had Norse and Germanic gods, so-called gods of war, gods of trickery, like Loki and Odin and so forth. They were revered for their cunning and for their ability of conquest, vanquishing others, victory, brute force. And my own ancestors, the Celts, they had underworld entities that they believed in and that they gave tribute to. You had Slavic ones, you had Baltic ones, you had these Baltic and Slavic spirits that they attributed, that they said that they had control over the weather, you know, for their harvest and whatnot. And in exchange for offerings, they would, you know, think that they could get a good harvest and so forth. This is what the Quran has explained to us in terms of people bargaining with the jinn, patronage with the jinn. And this goes back as far as you can go back in Europe. I'm talking about like 30,000 BCE, okay? Archaeological evidence in Europe proves that jinn worship goes back that far. Like I said, in Paleolithic cave complexes that you found in France, in Chauvet, in, what's it called? Lascaux, the Three Brothers Cave in France. You know, you had images of this antlered sorcerer type person. We understand that this, in Islam, we understand that this depicts people who communicate with the jinn, intermediaries with the jinn. And I mean, this abounds across Europe. Anyone who's familiar with European history knows this. You had all these types of figures in European history. You've been messing with the jinn for a very, very long time. I mean, from like 9000 BCE in England, you had, you know, shamans wearing deer skulls, literally deer skulls on their heads and performing rituals, channeling spirits and whatnot, trying to emulate predatory animals with this animal-human hybrid that is very consistent across all of the records, archaeological records, making offerings to try to guarantee, you know, successful hunts, successful crops and so forth. That's jinn patronage. That's devil patronage. That's seeking protection of the shayateen, okay? So from 30,000 BCE to 9,000 BCE, you people were doing these things. 20,000 years, you were doing that. If you move up to the Bronze Age, then you start getting into things like Stonehenge. We're all familiar with Stonehenge. You know, you have these patterns of rocks arranged in patterns at riverbeds, at mountain passes, you know, at so-called liminal spaces, thresholds between one area and another, that they refer to as like doorways between the realms, between the human realm and the spirit realm, between the seen and the unseen. You have archaeological evidence of sacrifices, human sacrifices, offerings, transactions with the jinn. That's what that is. It's devil worship. In places like Denmark, in places like Ireland, again, my ancestors, you literally had human sacrifices. You have what they call the bog bodies. You had ritual killings. It's the sacralization of violence. Does that sound familiar? It's devil worship. And you're doing it until today. Then you got these Sidhe in Ireland, these supernatural, supposedly fairies, basically, with portals to the underworld, the other world, and so on. That's jinn. That's nothing but jinn. And people sought their protection. And they do it until now. They sought their assistance and they sought their favor. They made offerings, they made sacrifices. That's right up to the Iron Age. Then you got the Druids and whatnot, right? Again, you got the symbols of the antlered sorcerers, warrior gods, ram-headed serpents, always elevating and always emulating predators in nature, animalistic predators. You had these rituals and ceremonies and beliefs, all connecting all of these things. The consistency is absolutely startling. I mean, it's a continuity across literally tens of thousands of years. The same sorts of practices, the same sorts of imagery, the same sort of transactional relationship with the jinn for tens of thousands of years, from one corner of the continent to the other, all across Europe. In Scandinavia, like I said, you had Loki, you had Odin, and so forth. You had in all their folk tales, you'll find this. In Scandinavia, and you had this idea that knowledge and understanding can be achieved through transgression, through deceit, through predation. You had magic, you had sorcery, you had these mediators with the spirit world, intermediaries, shaman, all communicating with the jinn, seeking their favor, seeking their protection, so on and so on and so on, over and over again in European history, seeking victory from the shayateen. I mean, it literally just goes on and on. You had your seers, soothsayers, oracles, and whatnot, always demanding sacrifices, always demanding tribute, blood, mutilation, degradation. I mean, is this registering with you at all with regards to your society and the ways of your society? This is your origin story. This is your backstory. This is where you came from. I mean, do I even need to talk about the Greco-Romans? It's literally the same belief pattern from prehistory until the Romans. It's the same. Just maybe a little bit more literate veneer on the patron-client relationship with supernatural powers. It's devil worship. It's jinn worship. It's working with the jinn. And Christianity didn't rupture this pattern at all. It's fundamentally the same religion. Once Europe became Christian, so-called, you followed the same religion that you've been following for tens of thousands of years, just rebranded it. That's all. What Europe followed was not even remotely similar to the actual religion that was preached by Nabi Isa, by Jesus, the prophet Jesus, alayhi salam, peace be upon him. Not even remotely similar to what he taught. Like I've said before, Rome did not actually become Christian. Christians became Romans. That's what actually happened. You just adapted. You adapted everything that you had always believed and everything that you had always practiced in your pagan religion in Europe, and you just put the costume of monotheism on it. That's the only difference. Catholics until today enact the drinking of blood and the eating of flesh every Sunday at Mass. You got other Christian denominations where they speak in tongues. Jinn possession, rebranded as the Holy Spirit. You've got idols, you've got superstitions, you've got jinn possession. Nothing changed. Nothing changed. You've got your amulets, you've got your charms, you've got your intercessors. You still have your magicians, you still have your witches, you still have your sorcerers casting spells, but instead of calling them spells, you just call them prayers. Prayers to the Father, to the Son, to the Holy Ghost, to Mary, to the saints, to the angels, to whoever, even to your pastor, I don't know, to your ancestors, to your loved ones who are long past and so forth. And then, of course, you had the kingship, rulership, and so forth, always was connected to their access to supernatural entities. Even your so-called enlightenment didn't change anything. That's a fact. It didn't change anything. It's just another rebranding. The same way that Christianity was a rebranding of paganism, secularism was also just another rebrand. Instead of calling upon, whatever, Odin or Loki or Saint Christopher or the Holy Ghost, people just turned to new labels like the universe. You hear that now. Energies, vibrations, archetypes, the unconscious, evolutionary psychology. Again, think about that. Evolutionary psychology. Again, it's with that human animal hybrid fixation. And the exchange is always the same, seeking advantage in the world from the unseen in return for belief, ritual, and obedience, subservience, subordination. And obviously in the West, occultism never disappeared either. Like I said, even amidst your modern scientific society, now you just scientize everything, vibrations, low and high vibrations, frequencies, and so on. It's the same as it ever was. You're the same as you ever were. Now, again, I don't care if you understand or if you believe or if you accept the reality of the existence of the jinn or the existence of shaitan. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you believe now. Your people believed it for the entirety of your history up until just yesterday. You know? And like I said, it's basically just semantics, whether you believe in it or not. It's just semantics. Because you do believe, you just use different terminology. You just use different rationales. You just use different definitions, different explanations, and so on. But the point is, you can deny whatever you like. But you cannot deny the reality of your history. The reality of your history going all the way back to the Ice Age. You people believed in otherworldly beings, and your people worshipped them. They sought their help, they sought their instruction, they sought their protection, and the intermediaries who claimed to be able to communicate with them, these otherworldly beings, these jinn, they led you, they guided you, they molded you, they ruled you, they shaped your whole culture, and you grew from those roots. They sought their help, they sought their protection, they sought material gain, and they sought success, they sought victory through them, through the jinn. They sought their favor, and they feared their wrath. And favor and wrath were always measured or always interpreted in terms of worldly acquisition, worldly favor. You know, if they favored you, then your crops would grow. You would have babies. Your enemies would be vanquished. You would have bounty and abundance, and so on in this life. If the jinn were angry with you, then your crops died. Your enemies defeated you. You were defeated by your enemies. You had poverty, you had famine, you didn't have children, and what have you. Your relationship was transactional always, and always based on fear and based on self-interest. Fear in terms of fear of weakness, fear of insufficiency, fear of inadequacy, and self-interest was always also dunya related, material self-interest. This is your moral code, the moral code of your so-called civilization. It was developed and reinforced across a vast expanse of time. And from the Islamic perspective, yes, obviously, we understand that those otherworldly beings were shayateen. That was devil worship that you were engaged in, that your so-called civilization was engaged in. And your deplorably primitive moral code is further evidence of that fact. These beings, that your sorcerers, your shaman, your priests, and so forth, these beings that they interacted with did not guide you to high, refined moral values, moral principles. It was always animalistic and predatory throughout. That's what they taught you. And you were never elevated by your worship. You were degraded by your worship. And that's what always happens. Yes, you should listen to the Muslims. You should listen to the Muslims about this, because we know all about shaitan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger told us all about shaitan, told us everything you need to know about the devil. We know it. We know exactly how this plays out when you mess with the jinn. We know exactly how that plays out. So you can get what you value from the jinn, but you'll never get what's truly valuable. Do you understand? Because the jinn will teach you, just like they taught the Europeans, to only value what the jinn can give you and to devalue what the jinn cannot give you. And throughout this whole process of interacting with the jinn, you will give them what they value, which is your humiliation and your corruption and your degradation. Or you've been in a Faustian deal for millennia as a so-called civilization in the West, in Europe. And your development as a people, as a so-called civilization, has been frozen since the Paleolithic age. You've been intertwined with the jinn for at least 3 to 4 decamillennia, 30 to 40,000 years. Do you understand me? That's the backstory of your culture. You're entrenched in this. These are the foundations. These are the roots of your so-called civilization. It's the roots, it's the trunk, and it's the branches of your so-called civilization. It has shaped everything about you. It has shaped everything about the West, about your paradigms, your perspectives, how you interact with the world, how you interpret reality, your relationship with morality, your relationship with ethics and principles and ideals and so forth. Even when you think you've broken free, when you pat yourself on the back for being so modern, for being so rational, for being so enlightened. The truth is you haven't escaped anything. You've just changed the packaging on what you've always had. You just changed the names. You just changed the rituals. You changed the architecture. You changed the locale of your worship and the manner of your worship. But the relationship is exactly the same. The same bowing to unseen masters. The same bargaining for worldly advantage. The same fear of losing their favor. The same fear of them. You went from spirits in the trees and the caves to saints in the cathedrals, and from saints in the cathedrals to, the universe, forces of nature, what have you. And now you moved on to whatever, algorithms, artificial intelligence, worshiping in corporate temples. It's still the same bargain. It's a transactional submission to something that you believe can give you control over the world without ever requiring you to control yourself. And you call it progress. But it's the same Paleolithic superstition, just dressed up with a new vocabulary. Once it was, if we offer the right sacrifice, then the rains will come. Then it was, if we recite the right, aria or what have you, then the saint will intercede on our behalf. Now it's, if we fund the right research, then the technology will save us. Different language, same primitive moral calculus. And you've refused the only arrangement that would actually break that cycle, which is servitude to the creator of the unseen, not to the unseen, not servitude to the unseen itself, but to the creator of the unseen. Because everything else that you've worshipped has only made you more like itself. Predatory, arrogant, and hollow. That's why your whole history from the Ice Age until today is actually, in reality, just one unbroken continuum of fear and greed, dressed up alternatively as religion or as politics or now as science. Every so-called golden age that you ever had was built on conquest, was built on violence, was built on exploitation and moral rot. You can change your gods 1,000 times, but you will never change your nature because the transaction has never changed. The root has never changed. You never cut yourself off from those roots, and you still seek the same things. You still pay the same price, and you're just as morally primitive today as you were 40,000 years ago. Think about your horror movies. Think about your horror movies. Do you know that most people in the world, most people in the global south, in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, and so forth, they find it very bizarre and they find it very disturbing how much you love those movies, those horror movies. They think it's bizarre and disturbing that it's even a genre at all, much less that it's one of the most popular genres in Western cinema. But I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why you love those movies so much. It's not random. It's not random that you came up with that, because it's not just entertainment for you. Horror movies are a ceremonial reenactment of your oldest religious instincts. You're simultaneously terrified and in awe of evil, the power of evil, or what you perceive to be the power of evil. And this perception of the power of evil that you have in the West, this goes back for tens of thousands of years with you. This is the oldest liturgy of the West, that is to be terrified of and yet to venerate that which terrifies you. You understand? To be terrified and to venerate that which terrifies you. To be horrified of the darkness, but to also seek the power of the darkness. You don't watch those movies to see the evil spirit, to see the demon, or to see the ghost, or what have you, to see that, Jason, or the, supernatural, basically immortal killer. You don't watch those movies to see the evil person or the evil entity get defeated. You watch those movies to see the carnage get unleashed. You watch those movies to see the sadism, to watch the glorification of evil. You watch those movies to feel the awe at the power of the devil. This is a religious experience for you when you watch a horror film. Because again, this goes all the way back to the very beginning of your so-called civilization. This is a very old impulse that you have. It's very deep in you. It evokes a deep, resonating feeling inside of you in the West, Westerners. It's the same way that, in other cultures, they might respond to a film that's about their heroic ancestors or about religious figures. It conjures up very deep, like I say, and deeply resonant emotions for Westerners. very deep, resonant emotions, feelings of awe, feelings of terror, and frankly, feelings of adoration. This genre is itself a ceremony. It's a ritual that invokes your ancestral spiritual roots. Think about it. I mean, how many horror films start off in some isolated cabin in the woods? Well, that's your history. An isolated cabin in the woods. And then the whole movie, in and of itself, the whole movie is just a parable about what happens when you anger the jinn, which is just another way of saying you shouldn't anger the jinn. You want to see what happens when someone does anger the jinn. You see that they're powerful, and you should respect them, and you should fear them, and you shouldn't mess with them, and so on. I mean, even in most of these films, think about it, in most of these films, especially the ones that are about demons, that are about possession and so forth, ghosts and whatnot, in most of these movies, the evil entity, the evil being, is never actually vanquished. It's either satisfied in one way or another, or it moves on to another target, or the protagonist himself or herself becomes the new vessel for that evil entity. You know, you very rarely ever see the jinn defeated in these movies, because in fact, they are the heroes of the story. The whole story actually only exists to solidify your justification for fearing and venerating them for all these millennia, because that's the basis of your whole so-called civilization, like I said. And in fact, this same impulse is the only reason why your current iteration as a society, as a culture, this is the reason why you so vehemently reject even admitting the existence of the jinn, the existence of shaitan. Even though your own continuous belief in the devil and your continuous subordination to the devil is actually uninterrupted and is manifest in every way all the time until today, but you deny it. And this is actually a form in and of itself. This is a form of fear and veneration, you know, the name that shall not be spoken. Because look, as I said, as Muslims, we understand this very completely. We understand this fully. We have very detailed information. We have very detailed knowledge about the jinn. And we are not in awe of the jinn. And we do not perceive them as powerful. Dangerous, but not powerful. No, they're dangerous, but not powerful. We are aware that they exist, and we know what they do, and we know what they can do, and we know why they do it, and we know what their tactics are, and so forth. And we know what happens when you get involved with the jinn. But to us, the jinn are just like any other dangerous creatures in this world, any other dangerous creature or predator on earth. They're the same as any dangerous or wicked people, and we avoid them, and we protect ourselves from them. You know, we protect ourselves from them, whereas what you did was to seek protection with them. We seek protection against them. You sought protection from them, with them. And that's because you were scared of them. You were scared of them because you perceived them to be so powerful. You perceived them to be supernaturally powerful. And then once you sought protection from them, or sought protection with them, then that just amplified and exaggerated to you their power. And of course, they encouraged you to do that. And then you got even more scared. You know, then you got even more in awe of what you thought to be their power. So it's a cycle that you created for yourself. But we're healthy. We have a healthy, balanced view about the jinn. We know what they can and cannot do, and we know how to deal with them. Now, again, like I said, I don't care if you consciously believe or disbelieve in any of this. It doesn't matter to me. I mean, it would be better for you if you at least acknowledge it. But either way, it doesn't matter, because the irreducible reality is that you exist in a culture that has always been completely and inextricably connected to the jinn, to the shayateen. Belief in them, worship of them, client-patron relationships. That's your history. And it's not wise for you to ignore the impact that this history has had on your development as a so-called civilization. Obviously, it has affected you. And again, it doesn't matter if you believe that your ancestors were or were not genuinely in contact with these beings, or if they were just faking it, you know, if they were faking it for 30,000, 40,000 years. It's fine. You can believe that the hunter-gatherers of the Paleolithic age were cunning enough and savvy enough and manipulative enough to invent these things, to invent these interactions, to invent the spirit entities. That's up to you. You can believe that. We know otherwise. And really, so do you. You really do know otherwise as well. But you can stick to whatever story makes you comfortable. It doesn't matter. Like I said, whether it was real or whether it was fake, your people did with it what they did. And it made your so-called civilization what it is today. It made your worldview what it is today. It made your moral code what it is today. And it made your character what it is today. It made your behavior and it made your actions what they are today and what they have been for as long as anyone can remember. And it's made the systems that you created the way they are. And objectively, this worldview, this moral code, and these behaviors, and these actions, and your systems, objectively are utterly horrendous. They've been a scourge on humanity. They've been a scourge and a plague on humanity for centuries, and that is not even open to debate. But you're never going to be able to understand any of this. You're never going to be able to understand any of this about yourself, about your so-called civilization, about your societies, unless and until you confront and understand the history that you grew from, the root that you grew from. Because you grew from it, but you didn't grow out of it. You understand? You didn't outgrow it. It permeates everything about your societies right now in 2025. And that's what makes your society so peculiar. That's what makes your society so strange and so inhuman in so many ways. Now listen, I'm not saying all of this as an indictment. Understand me. I'm not saying this as an indictment. I'm saying it as a diagnosis. Because at the end of the day, you are my brothers and sisters in humanity. Like I said, you have been lied to, and you have lied to yourselves, and you have believed the lies you've been told and the lies that you told yourself. And that has been catastrophic for you, and it has been catastrophic for the rest of us. And you keep looking around within your society for solutions. You keep looking around within your society for remedies. And everything that you find is actually nothing but deflections and misdirections and diversions and placebos. In your current state, your society, your so-called civilization, is frankly incapable of being honest. It's incapable of being moral. It's incapable of being just. It's incapable of being decent. Your so-called civilization is incapable of being civilized. The truth of the matter is that you cannot be trusted, you cannot be relied upon, you cannot be responsible or fair or believed. That's just the way it is. And that's because of your whole history. It's because of the fact that your whole history and your whole development, or lack thereof, because of that, morality is nothing but a game of wordplay for you. You know, if you make a wrong move, you just lose some leverage. You lose social capital. You lose credibility. And you lose that not because you said or did something that was immoral. I mean, it's not due to the immorality itself, but you lose points because you just lapsed in the maintenance of your appearance of official accepted morality. You understand? Morality for you is just a game of one-upsmanship. It's a point-scoring game. It's a rap battle. Okay, this is the approach of someone, or the approach of a people who do not have an internalized moral system. But you see, like I've talked about before, I've talked about this a few times. You have layers. You have in the West, you have the actual operative code, and then you have the interface. And the interface is beautiful. Oh, the interface is beautiful. It's lovely. But the operative code is barbaric. So you have people, you have millions of people in the West. I believe this. You have millions of people in the West who've been raised on the interface, okay, who believe the interface. I'm talking about the moral rhetoric, you know. It's like someone who's not a tech person, someone who's not familiar with computers and so forth. So they think that their computer actually operates by the icons on their screen and by clicking and so forth, because they have no idea about the actual code behind any of that. They don't know how the computer actually functions, how it actually works. So you have people who believe that the West actually is the rhetoric that you find in the interface. See, they have no idea about the actual operative code of that so-called civilization, of the so-called civilization that they're living in. They don't understand that. And so they experience severe cognitive dissonance, like I said. This is why if you're someone in the West who genuinely wants to be moral, You constantly feel like you're going crazy in that society. You feel like you're living in a madhouse in that society. Because you think that morality is supposed to be connected to actions, not just appearances. You think that it's not just supposed to be a point-scoring game for social capital and social leverage. But that's not how your society works, you know? So you'll keep clicking on the icon, but the program won't open because the code is missing. You can right-click, you can left-click, you can double-click, you can try everything, but that program is not going to open because the files are not there. You know, it's like back in the day when we would install a pirated version of Microsoft. It's the same. You have a counterfeit morality in the West. The code isn't there. The files are missing. It's not going to work. You know, on your screen, it looks great, but none of it actually functions. So you're frustrated and you're confused and you don't understand why this is. You know, you'll tell yourself that your system has a virus, you know, like a corrupted file or something. That's what it means when people say, like, for example, the problem is capitalism. The problem is this or that system within the Western so-called civilization. Or the problem is this or that politician or what have you, or this or that social movement. No, the foundational coding is wrong. And it's been wrong the whole time. Okay, the interface is moral looking, but the operative system is moral inversion. You've been a predatory, materialistic, nihilistic, exploitative, morally bankrupt so-called civilization from the very inception. Morality and principles and ethics in the West are just a superficial interface for you. So if you are someone who genuinely wants morality and principles and ethics to actually go deeper than that, then you're going to have to stop looking for that where you are. Because it's not going to happen. It doesn't exist where you are. What we know as the West, you know, Europe and so forth, it has been demonic. Okay, it's been demonic since before the woolly mammoth went extinct. Europeans were involved with and interacting with and seeking the protection of the jinn when the Sahara Desert was still a grassland. You understand? And they never stopped from then until today. And once you understand this, you can't not see it all around you. You know, you think that things have been going downhill, but they haven't. They've been exactly the same as they've ever been. Understand, Shaitan flows through the veins of Western so-called civilization. And if you're trying to be a good person, and I know you'll understand this because I know that you've experienced this. If you're trying to be a good person, a moral person, a decent person, then you're treated like a cancer in that society because you are like a cancer in that society. They'll treat you like you're the one who's sick. They'll treat you like you're the infection. They'll make you think that you're crazy. They'll make you think that there's something wrong with you because they normalize what's abnormal and they make the unnatural natural. And I'm telling you, if you object to this, if you reject this, then you are in fact the one who is out of step with your society. You are in fact the one who is sick according to the society's definition of healthy, the society that you're in. And they're not going to change their definitions. I'm telling you, they're not going to change their definitions. So you're the one who's got it wrong. You're the one who's got it wrong because you're expecting for your society to be other than what it always has been. And that's not going to happen. It's not going to change. So I'm telling non-Muslim Westerners, and I'm talking to you truly with compassion, because you are, as I say, my brothers and sisters in humanity, and you have been deceived. You have been misled. You have been fooled, cruelly fooled. And the cruelest thing about this, the cruelest thing about how you have been lied to is that when you actually believe the lies, they punish you for believing the lies. They'll punish you for your naivete. You understand? They punish you for believing them when they said that they were moral, because you're supposed to know that it was all a con. You're supposed to know that this was all just a game. You know, it's just like if you have an upright cop who works in a corrupt police force, well, he'll get punished by his fellow officers because he's gullible enough to actually believe in the law. He's gullible enough to actually believe in justice and serving and protecting the community, when actually everyone who works with him, all of his colleagues, all of his fellow police officers, is just out to get their cut of seized drug money. They're all out there just to extort and to shake down the neighborhood. So he'll be punished for believing in what's moral and what's right. But I'm also saying this, and I'm mostly saying this, of course, for my brothers and sisters in Islam, because this is extremely important. You have to understand this about the West, about the origins of the West. And don't ever let yourself think for a moment that they mean anything that they say about morals, about principles, about ethics, and so forth, or about the law. No, don't ever let yourself trust them, and don't ever let yourself believe them. Don't ever let yourself rely on them or count on them in any way whatsoever. They won't do anything for you when they pretend that they're in solidarity with you, say over Palestine, or whether it's over Palestine or Sudan or anything else. If they pretend that they're in solidarity with you, believe me, they won't do anything for you, except that whatever they did for you, they will try to leverage that to try to get a compromise out of you. They'll try to compromise you. They'll try to corrupt you. They'll try to misguide you. They'll try to lead you astray. And in fact, that's the only reason that they ever tried to get close to you in the first place. And they do that because they can't help it, because it's ingrained in their cultural DNA over the course of millennia of tutelage and patronage under Shaitan. So you have to deal with them very cautiously. And you have to deal with them always being very consciously aware of this fact. I mean, I pray that they will be guided, but unless and until they are guided, they are not. And the friendliest ones are the most dangerous ones, whether they're from the so-called right or the so-called left. This is just like the difference between iOS versus Android, right and left. They all come from that same so-called civilization, and they all have those same civilizational instincts. So understand who you're dealing with, and don't ever let your guard down. And act like you know that we are in a conflict with Shaitan and his minions. And don't ever show despair in public. Don't ever show weakness in public. Don't ever show pessimism in public. Don't ever be divisive against the Muslims. Don't ever help Shaitan against our own people. And don't ever utter a word in public that will or that even might give comfort to our enemies.